At the beginning of the revolution, it was Imam Khomeini, and now it's Ayatollah Khamenei, and in the future, it might be somebody else. Because that's the framework in which we manage our affairs and which we allow the people to participate. I just want to add a very, very important point. Again, those who want to talk about Iran and never spend a second looking at what Ayatollah Khamenei says in his speeches, you can't even count them as experts. They're not experts. They don't know anything, because when you look at some of the things that Ayatollah Khamenei says, he is addressing directly the issues that they raise. And if they were honest academics, if they were honest journalists, they would actually go and see what he's saying. But they're not honest. They don't care. So in his last speech, he made a very good point. He talked about Islam. He talked about republicanism. He talked about this being the big achievement of Imam Khomeini, was establishing the Islamic Republic, telling those religious people that believe in religious dictatorships such as the Taliban and such as Al-Qaeda and Daesh, those types of people, telling them that no, Islam allows for the participation of the people. Participation of the people is a central element in governance in Islam. So this is Imam Khomeini's rebuke of those within religion who don't have a place for the people. And it was also Imam Khomeini's rebuke to those who claim that the only way you can have participation of the people is that people give up their religion, which is, maybe in the West and maybe with the experience of Christianity, that might have been an issue. But it's not the same in Islam. Islam is not Christianity. Not all religions are exactly the same. Religion as a category is not the same. Just because that's the experience that the Westerners had with Christianity doesn't mean that that's what we have to do in Islam. So the Islamic Republic is the great achievement that we've done. And this is the point that I wanted to point out, which was the important thing that he mentioned. He said that the important point is the participation of the people. And currently in the world, the way people participate in governance is through elections. This is when you are after having people participate in their own governance, the way it is done in the world is through elections. This is the way it's done. And then he added a very interesting sentence. He said, maybe in the future, it might be some other way. So the point is the participation of the people. In the world that we live in now, in our time, in our era, the way that you participate, the people participate in governance is through elections. If in the future there is some other form, okay, so that's the way then we do it. With that in mind, clearly we are a democracy, but a democracy that is based on Iran. And it's an Iranian democracy. It's an Islamic democracy. And we don't have to answer to anybody about it. It comes from our own experience. It comes from our own religion and beliefs and values. And it comes from our own history. So if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't.
So the main point is that democracy is not a one recipe for all. When you were talking about the West, I remember I guess the last Munich conference held in 2020, just before the pandemic began. And the main theme of the Munich Security Conference was Westlessness. And there I remember the report was reading that the Western countries, not just the United States, at the time it was President Trump, and it was not just about the United States. It was saying that the whole West, as we know the West, is not adhering to its own values and is not actually representing the same values that they once claimed, like freedom, equality, democracy, and such, and all the things that they were saying that we are representing to the world. And the report said that the other countries, non-Western countries, are not looking for being like the Western countries anymore. So that says that even the Western, let's say, thinkers seem to agree with you that the Western countries are not a good representative of the democracy as they claim to be. And it was a good point that it necessarily doesn't mean that it should be like the other countries, that the version that we have in Iran is not necessarily working for the Americans. The Americans for the, for example, for the Germans, or the Germans for the French people. It needs to be based on the culture, the demands and the requirements of each country. We have a question here about the impact that the elections are going to have on the relationship between Iran and the United States. We are going to discuss this in detail on the third night, on the third panel on Sunday, and we are hopefully honored to have Dr. Trabi on the panel as well as one of our key speakers. But maybe you want to shortly speak about that, because this question doesn't belong to tonight. We are discussing actually the structures and such things. So, but if you want, Dr. Trabi, if you want to shortly talk about that, be my guest.
Sure. In order to answer that, you have to first say what is the relationship now, so that we can see if what effect it will have. The relationship that it is now it's a war. It's a cold war, and sometimes it's a hot war. So this is the relationship between the U.S. and Iran, and it has been for since the revolution. It's a cold war. The Americans want to change the system in Iran, either by having Saddam attack it and supporting him, or then having some sort of a coup d'état, or having some sort of a soft revolution, or having some sort of a maximum pressure. So that's the relationship we're dealing with. I don't see it in any way fundamentally changing with this administration or that administration, or this person coming or that person coming. And just for the record, which we're going to discuss, inshallah, in much more detail, basically what you had during the Obama administration was not a change in U.S. policy. It was basically the recognition by the Americans that they cannot violently overthrow the Islamic Republic and that they can't attack it militarily. Again, I referenced that the one group in the U.S. which is the most against military action against Iran is the Pentagon, and are the generals. So at some point, there were some people in the Pentagon who were able to convince Obama and his administration that this is not a feasible possibility to ever attack Iran, because the costs for the U.S. would be devastating in terms of its interest both in West Asia and also even further other places in the world. So basically what they ended up doing is they said, okay, fine, we'll try to, somehow come to some sort of an agreement, and then maybe in 2025, when the generation that didn't see the war and didn't see Imam, and when, so-and-so, that person is no longer the leader, then with the new generation of Iranians, we will establish a new relationship. A new relationship is the old relationship that existed before the revolution, which is, Iran as a vassal state of U.S. interests in the region. Now, very interestingly, this was the thinking, maybe 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, if we look at the JCPOA being signed in 2015. But in these last 5 years, the world has changed dramatically. We have the Americans, nearly everyone in America, even the most hawkish people, acknowledging that America is retreating from the region. And the idea that somehow any country, even countries like Saudi Arabia or Israel, would just be vassals of the U.S. is something that's completely now, it's not even an issue anymore. So, the world has changed a lot since what happened that led to the JCPOA. Unfortunately, some elites in the West and some elites in Iran haven't noticed that the world has changed, and Iran has changed, and the U.S. has changed, and the region has changed. So with the new or old government, it's not going to make a big difference. The decisions in terms of the strategy, Iranian strategy, are made on a level that's higher than the administrations. It's done by the leadership in consultation with the Supreme National Council. The one thing that is important about administrations as it relates to the Supreme National Security Council is the fact that the president and the foreign minister and the intelligence minister and various ministers are members of the National Security Council as president. So the president of Iran is the chairman of the National Security Council at the same time. So in that sense, it does make a difference who is in the administration. It makes a difference whether it's, Rouhani as the chairman or whether it's whoever is going to be the next president. Is it significant? Well, it depends on the issue. Does that mean that major policies will change or strategies will change? No, because that's not the way it works in Iran. But does it mean that maybe implementing those policies and strategies will be different and done in a different way than the current administration? Absolutely, because obviously people have different views on how things should be implemented, but it doesn't affect the general strategy that is determined by the system itself, in this case, the leadership with the National Security Council.
Thank you very much. Dear people on the Clubhouse, they can raise hand and ask questions if they would like, because we are going to shortly close the session. There are two questions that I would like to ask. The last one. Could you describe how members of parliament are elected compared to countries that have systems such as proportional representation, ranked choice voting, runoffs, etc.?
Could you repeat that? I didn't quite understand what the question was.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. What was the question?
It is on the public chat on the screen if you have it, the last one.
Well, okay, so like we explained, that there's a census in Iran every 10 years, and then whatever number Brother Hamid was talking about is determined in terms of the proportion of one representative to the proportion of the population. Then what happens is you have different electoral constituencies in which, again, based on the population of that city or of that region, a certain amount of representatives are determined. So, for example, Tehran has the most, obviously being the most populous constituent area of the country. I think it has over 20 representatives. For example, Qom has 3 representatives given its population. And so based on the population, and the population being the eligible voters, not the total population, then a certain amount of representatives for that constituency are determined, and then people can run for that seat if they are vetted, if they pass the qualifications of the Guardian Council. They can run as independents, they can run as individuals, they can run on a list where they combine with other candidates, especially in the big cities. That's the way it usually works, because people are not going to take the time to investigate 20 or more than 20 representatives, each one individually, and then go write their name in. So, for example, in Tehran, if you have over 20 representatives, or so, I think it's 30 now, there's lists, and people will just vote that list. But in other cities like Qom, where there's 3 people, it's much more of less of a list issue and more of an individual issue. And people vote for that, and that person then becomes the member of parliament. Now, one point that exists is that the parliament itself, once that person is elected, the parliament itself can determine whether that person is ethically qualified to enter the parliament. It happens very rarely, but it does happen sometimes, that a person will get qualified by the Guardian Council, will get the votes, and then the parliament, if new information comes up, if there's some new evidence, or if there's some new event that happens, the parliament itself can exclude a member from sitting, or it can expel the member if some situation arises. Doesn't happen a lot, but it's happened a couple times.
Thank you very much. I would like to skip the other question because it's not related to our topics, respectfully, and we are actually out of time. For the information of our guests, we are going to discuss this current term, this current competition election tomorrow. at the same time on Saturday, and we are going